Our speaker today, Peder Jungck, is Vice President and Chief Technology Officer of CloudShield Technologies, which is an SAIC company. His career spanned over 20 years. Actually, I was just talking with him. Turned out he grew up not too far from where I grew up and is now in California. I grew up in the Midwest in Wisconsin. We both figured I moved a little farther south, he moved west. There are better places for weather in the winter, although last year may make us question those statements, make me question that statement. But anyhow, he's been working in the networking industry. He's a visionary. He's been an executive and an entrepreneur who's pioneered high-speed contact-based networking and cybersecurity systems. He holds more than a dozen patents for network infrastructure and security products, and also has been the CIO and CTO for a number of technology companies. Peder is founder and the guiding architect behind CloudShield cybersecurity products. So please join me in welcoming CloudShield's from CloudShield Technology, Peder Jungck.
Thank you very much.
Welcome to UMBC.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming out this early morning. You know, what I wanted to really do is talk about kind of the threats in kind of cyberspace. And one of the things that was funniest is I was talking to my son, and he goes, "Dad, so how are you going to define cyberspace?" And I go, "Well, what do you mean?" He goes, "Well, in all the talks, you got to go define the terms in which you're kind of talking about." And I go, "Well, this should be easy because we all know what cyber is." Well, I think one of the most interesting things is I don't think we do. You know, for one, I did like all of us. If you need to know how a word is defined, we go to Wikipedia. Well, I found a manuscript. Now, this manuscript went on about an author who I guess first coined it, you know, kind of more than a decade ago for some very different type of definition, to this electromagnetic spatial type environment in which things are occurring. And I'm going, okay, so far, none of these things have really come upon kind of what I think of as cyberspace. And I don't think it should take a page and a half to where I kind of get more confused by the end of it to really figure out what it is. I then went on and said, okay, well, let me try and be eloquent. We've got to be able to come up with this one-sentence description of what it is that then everybody's going to agree with and go, yeah, that's it. Well, I can tell you that I've failed at that miserably. I cannot give you exactly that, but what I'm going to hopefully do is at least leave you with the sense of kind of my understanding of cyberspace, so that then we can at least have that as a foundation to then talk about kind of the threats. And out of this, it's really to compare and contrast what cyberspace is as compared to what I think we've all grown up with, which has been the internet. The internet is a technology. It's something that we created. It was man-made. It's about electronics and about communications and things that connect all of us that we can go and deal with. Cyberspace, though, is much different from that in that it has kind of ramifications on kind of everything that is about our whole entire world and kind of our community. And so part of what I tried to look at is even how do you go and even look at cyberspace in that type of point of view and communicate it. And so I tried to look at this, and while it is man-made, and I think it's probably one of the biggest man-made creations we've ever done to have a global impact on us, I think there are other things that maybe we didn't make that have had similar pieces. And this is where I go and look at, over the thousands of years, think of things like the oceans. At one point, it was water, and it was things that helped people and animals get food and nutrients and the rest. We then learned about how it could create transportation. It then provided connectivity to us and the rest. But now at this point, we have, as a world, a very different view of our oceans. It is not just this thing of water and the fish and what it produces and how it does transportation, but it is key to kind of everything from our climate to our jet streams. It's about energy, as we're talking out in California about how the tides can go and produce things. It has a much different view to where now, as a global society, we have to protect them. And we understand that it is key to our existence, and that even though it is a thing, it permeates kind of ways of life, of society, and everything else. And so, while that is a very different thing than a technological creation, what we talk, what I really want to assert is that if you think of cyberspace, it too is something that has gone beyond a technology to where it is permeating kind of everything we're doing. And so that's where if you look at this, you know, kind of as I looked at it, I go, well, let me start to compare and contrast kind of my world if I were to compare cyberspace to kind of what I knew about the internet. You know, in the internet, I remember sitting on my, you know, deck Rainbow with a little 1200 baud Hayes modem dialing in to this piece where some serial port communication would somehow get my email there, and I just hoped it would work. And now it's like, okay, the texts are flying, and I don't know how many have come in my cell phone since, you know, I've gotten here. You know, but it's this very different world. But at least in that internet, I knew that when I turned off my machine, when I came back, it pretty much was as it was. You know, I could disengage from that type of world, and it was a discrete thing. It was my whole life, and then there was this connection out there into the internet. And it was some place that I can transact upon and the rest. And this went on, you know, throughout year after year of how that kind of grew. If I go and I look at kind of cyberspace, you know, in this modern environment, you can't disconnect. You know, there is no real sets of borders to where you can say, I can get out of this. You can't turn it off. You know, you go to the grocery store, you go to the bank, you try and make a phone call, you do anything. You don't even know where that is connecting into something. And you can sit there and say, well, I'm going to go do some sort of transaction, and you know, I'm going to try and avoid having anything I do have an impact upon kind of cyberspace and the internet. But you can't drive the car down the road without a sensor picking it up and recording that back so that somebody else's Google map is going to show you, gee, how fast is traffic moving? You know, these are the types of things to where as you try and disengage, you can't, because this permeates kind of everything that exists out there. And I think that's really where you start to see this difference, is that as you find that, we now have moved to this point of building something man-made that I would assert we cannot as man kind of take it down. This is something to where it will still exist. You can say I'm going to turn off the internet, but there's still going to be devices. They're going to create other types of networks and connections and pieces. You have people all around the globe would all have to agree to never again use the technologies like this to be able to have that go away. And that's where I assert you can't go and get away from this thing being something that you can actually understand and control. And so that's where you have to change kind of your mindset to be able to start to understand what the threats are. Because this is no longer about a pipe that goes between a couple of places, and I'm worried about a transaction, and then how do I just make sure that some other transaction does not occur within that I didn't want? You know, and that's where I really look at this difference of kind of from that internet to kind of our cyberspace and how that's really changed kind of our world. Because I think this is the mindset that we need to start to get our heads around to be able to get a sense of it so that we can start to understand what would threaten our environment, what would we have to go and worry about to be able to take advantage of all the benefits we have in here without kind of going and making this something that is going to control us. And so, you know, this is where what's interesting is if you think about kind of the differences. You know, I started looking at it going, well, what makes up kind of my reality? Well, I look at kind of in kind of the internet age, and, you know, I went through kind of that whole piece of everything from, you know, going to college when we were just getting our internet connectivity, and it was our VAXs talking to other machines, and we just barely had this, all the way to the point of, you know, how do you go get those first websites to, you know, I worked at a company where we created kind of permission-based email systems, so we had these large-scale systems communicating on the internet, and, you know, got to buy banks of hundreds of servers to go create our firewalls, our web servers. But it was, the data in my data center was mine, the rest of it was out there. But what I was doing is trying to create business transactions and other things to where, when I did an exchange, I wanted to get real money. Real money, those were dollars, they were pounds, they were pieces of things that were instruments that had been used for hundreds of years that we all understood. You know, the people I was exchanging with was an individual that we could understand, where they lived, what they did, what they wanted. I was going to ship them something. And it was something where it was, I had no notion that they weren't kind of a real person from that I could have recognized if they walked in my front door to buy a product, or whether they came in and they bought it through the internet. These were all about tangible pieces that grounded every single type of technology transaction, and the internet was this mechanism to go do that. And it wasn't that all of a sudden I thought that, okay, great, when we went home, You know, I want to make sure that somebody doesn't take down the front of the website and change something on my web page. But I didn't experience or live in a world where I felt that there was all these rogue things were going to occur inside my network when I didn't know it, and even while I'm watching the front door, that everything was going to kind of leak out the back door. And so it was one of these to where it was a much more sensible world. If I go look at cyberspace, you know, now I can have an avatar in some game on some server that I don't even know how I got to there, but I can get to it from any machine. Somebody who may not even be real, it may be a bot, can go and steal that thing and trade it for a currency. You know, they may get some gold in WoW, or they may get some NX points or something else that they have exchanged it for because it has value. And there may be people around the globe that are going to work their tail off for this virtual currency, which is not traded on any exchange that most of the rest of us who look in the banking community think about. But, you know, I don't know how many of you know this, but, you know, checked with my kids, and, you know, 10,000 gold on World of Warcraft's about 27 bucks. You know, there's an exchange rate for this. You know, so somebody can spend time in some other place of the world, they can collect this, and they can exchange it for hard currency. All of a sudden, we've created exchange systems into currencies that are created without some government having to regulate it. Who's controlling inflation and deflation of virtual currencies? They have an exchange rate. They have these types of pieces, but this is the world of kind of cyber. But what's interesting is it really goes and equalizes kind of things in the planet. Because all of a sudden now you have things where, well, for people to get dollars, they have to have exchange with, you know, companies and businesses and consumers in America. We have to go and figure out, you know, how they're going to do that with inside their bounds of their country and the guidelines and foreign trade and all the rest of these. And it's not about that all of a sudden somebody can go and amass these great pieces of value. Somebody can sit in another country, amass massive amounts of virtual currency that they exchange for PayPal that gets them to dollars that they never bring into their country. They never went and exchanged something that anybody could go and see and watch. But yes, they could amass fortunes. They could change kind of how they are. And this is where we live in a world that we can't take that away. And we also have no control systems on who can create a new virtual currency. You know, if all of a sudden you want to go to Starbucks and start giving away free iTunes kind of scratch-offs to get your kind of music of the week, you know, there's some asserted value to that. Now, you know, nobody went and said, gee, you can't go and deflate the value of a song, you know, that type of way. It's got pieces. And we can go and argue that, hey, in the music industry, they're concerned how that's going. But we watch and we experience this every single day. You know, my wife will not use a credit card at Starbucks. She will only use her Starbucks reward card. I'm going, we're creating these new forms of currencies that tie off to some digital thing. You know, she can take her phone and put it on a scanner just like we can do at our mobile boarding pass, and that does it. So she doesn't even need a physical card anymore to exist for there. And so I think this is where, as you start to think of this world, all of a sudden this changes kind of what it was from what it used to be. That internet, we had hard dollars, we had hard currencies and things that we exchanged. You know, so if I look at this, you know, cyberspace is providing this incredible opportunity as far as kind of the reaches of education and access and kind of leveling these economic, you know, barriers and that to the bounds on a global basis. But also what it's done is cyberspace is providing connectivity to everything that we've built and we've done to anybody that's out there. Well, the interesting thing I put is that don't think of it from the technological point of view of, here's my company, here's my front door, you know, all right, we're all here, we created the internet to exchange business, do these types of things. But there's people who live in other places who do not have the same cultural views, the same cultural bounds of what's there. The internet is a research place. If you put it there, it's for me to go and explore and to learn and to play. The notion of where we can say, well, gee, you trying to enter into my system and attack this or do something, you know, gee, that's an attack. Somebody else may go, no, this is my education. How am I supposed to learn? You know, we have a little laptop running on solar power with a little satellite type link, and that's all we have, and we're here to learn, and it's out there, that's our playground. And we want people to learn. But we need to realize that because it is global, it means that we have global reach and global understanding and a global set of perceptions that is going to change for kind of everybody. And so that's really where, you know, we need to think of this is it is neither good nor bad, it is. But it is something that we created, but we cannot destroy. But if you think about that, it changes kind of how you're going to go look at that. And so if we start to think of kind of these cyber threats, how do we go address that? You know, I think the interesting thing is if you think of the media, what you hear about is all the way on kind of the left of this slide, you have kind of everything from the defense communities to intelligence, the rest, who build big, large computer systems. Whether it's an internet or there are other types of networks, they have to get the key information, you know, managed and exchanged and dealt with and protected. And so there, the threat of cyberspace is kind of the most real because it gets to really almost a systemic threat to our society. And so we're going to protect that. And fortunately, there's a lot of people here in Maryland with, you know, the whole I-95 corridor. You've got some of the best and the brightest of really trying to grapple with this, who've got a sense of cyberspace and are really trying to go take care of that. But this is something to where, you know, we've heard the stats, you know, the bulk of critical infrastructure is within commercial companies. It may not even be in the United States, it's going to be around the globe. We may find that, you know, because of the internet, we want to go and have our data center sitting in the middle of a place that's going to have tons of solar panels, and that may be somewhere far away because that's the most efficient way for me to go achieve that. And so it is not something that is a geographically bound piece that we can say we can kind of go and control. But what we do need to do is make sure that we have people that can start to really get this and can understand it and can grow so that then as we start to change kind of this whole dialogue and understanding of what it is, we can kind of move that knowledge throughout all of industry and all of what we do as kind of people leveraging this technology. You know, and I think this is really that key point, you know, changing your mindset. But there's some of the things that I look at from a security point of view. We always think about, all right, I'm going to build my network, and it's good. I'm going to then put up these boundaries, and then we're going to open up the internet. And at that point, I was safe. And then at some point, things are going to occur, and I'm going to defend against that. Well, what we've learned is they may have already been in the supply chain of the software, the operating system that you loaded. It may have been that latest patch and that update that you loaded onto that already brought that piece in. It may mean that you build that perfectly, but then somebody walks in with a USB stick from home, and the next thing you know, you've got something running around on the network just because they thought they'd share a PDF. And these are the issues that we've got to realize that, you know what, those types of threats, they exist, but you can't just go and say, well, how am I going to deal with them all? You got to realize that you're going to live within an environment to where you may never get rid of all of them. And so it's then about really, why did you even build this? Why are you leveraging it? How do we go beyond? How do we actually go in and make use of what we're trying to achieve? Let's think about how do we get the use and the availability of our network? How do we get the accomplishment of our goals? And this is where, if you think about that, we got to go beyond this notion of just, I'm going to block attacks. I'm just going to stop the types of leakage that's occurring. Yes, you need to do those things. We need to put in those pieces to get rid of that. But that is a lot of the noise. And if you think of the modern threats that are appearing, you know, these are not the ones that are just somebody sitting at home running some cool tool they downloaded off the internet just to see what they could get done. They exist, and sure, tons of people are playing. But we can get systems to go do that. But if there's only a few of us to be able to really go and fight against the broader pieces, we need to understand, you know, how they're going at it. What is of value within my business? What are those things that I need to worry about? And how do I assure that my trying to stop things from happening that are negative does not go and actually cause the desired effect of me actually making my environment kind of unusable for everybody else. And one of the things that I think is the most interesting concept just to take is, imagine if you're a bank, and imagine if, let's say, 1% of the account just had a few of the numbers change within it. Not deleted, not anything offline, not anything that, you know, would throw off any sort of system to go and say, gee, it's all the way different. But if you just start changing things, well, it doesn't take a lot of derivations of that to start to realize you break down trust. You break down different types of mechanisms that are in there. How long is it going to take you to figure that out? And how many backup cycles back was it when that occurred? Well, what if it didn't happen from one actor at one point in time, but it was from lots of different little pieces? And there was no moment in time when everything was just kind of perfect. And I think these are the types of things we're finding. You know, it was Mike McConnell that went and talked about, you know, this type of threat could be some of the worst possible things. Not that, gee, it was working yesterday, it stopped working today. Or it used to be fast and now it's kind of slow. Or, gee, this system's no longer up and I've got to go figure out what's going on because it's not acting right. But it's just, you just start changing with it. Well, what if you just start changing a few of your blog posts to start to say something slightly different? You know, these are the pieces to where it's like, well, gee, you might paint a very different picture of even how you thought somebody went and persuaded kind of an audience if that world just changes. And this is where this is a very different notion than just kind of the classical, we have a transaction, an electromagnetic system that exchanges data, and either it's in a healthy state or it's in a bad state. Reality may never exactly be like that. And these are not types of things that are just, you know, fictitious, made up, but they're happening. I think the other piece, too, is that in this type of world, everybody has access to this technology. It is no longer that, well, the finance department's on the finance system, and then IT's quarantined their part of the network, and nobody will get in. In HR, they've got their records, it's over there, it's set. You know, I go online and do my new benefits update, I do all the rest of these things. All these systems go in and log in. You know, this is all the insurance update times, all the rest. I'm putting in all that personal data, it goes out in some big machine, it connects in, goes automatic into the HR. If I don't fill out my forms in time, somebody yells at me online for that. You know, it is all interconnected. It is not some little segregated thing where I had to go to the HR office and told them, here's my things, hand them my sheets of paper, and they put it into some lockdown piece, whether it's paper or whether it's electronic. This is all permeating. Well, what that also means is that we also need to think on the backside, when we think of IT, when we think of our infrastructure, we can't just think of it from IT people. You know, one of the classic stories is you go and you have, you know, somebody goes and gets frustrated at work, and they go and they delete a bunch of databases that cause an outage for a day. And business after business deals with these things. And then what you find out is, a week later from HR, yeah, they weren't showing up for work. You know, they're really frustrated. You know, their boss really ticked them off. You know, and that was just the final straw. But there's nothing inside IT's monitoring that even permits them to be able to even understand what's happening on over in HR. We've segregated that information off. And so in all of our security of, well, we need to go and set that up, that privacy information, protect that, separate these things. What we've done is we've created these vast openings into where we're just making ourselves kind of blind. And so I think one of the things is as we start to think about even securing an infrastructure in this space, we need to make sure that we're really looking much more holistically as a business and understanding it. And what I'm not meaning is to go and take and say, okay, let's hand all the HR records over to finance. What I'm saying is, let's make everybody involved in this equation, from your customers to every employee to every part of your business, realizing that there's metrics and there's pieces that all of us have an impact upon that. And that you can't be in HR and not understand that there could be ramifications. If this person is really struggling, if we're not going and helping them achieve kind of their goals, do they have the ability to go and cause havoc? Do they have other types of routes as those types of opportunities? Let's understand this, because it's not going to be something to where you're going to ever achieve that from some just big state of locking down everything. But it's just all of us starting to comprehend that, hey, there are ramifications that can occur, so that just in our normal, ordinary course of business, we can understand how to start to address them, because it is much broader. But much of that also deals with what is really the lower left kind of 3 red dots on this food chain of kind of what's happening. With having something like cyberspace, creating economies, creating value out there in that infrastructure, beyond just the private transactions and potential, you know, here's a couple opportunities of espionage we had for value years ago, we've created something very different that now you're getting very different types of organizations focused on this. Those that felt it was more worthwhile to go and create a drug system, now are saying, hey, it's a lot cheaper and a lot better to hire some really talented folks, and let's go and do that in the cyber world. And nobody can figure out who did it or where they did it from or how I moved that. And I'm going to move it out of even physical currencies to hop it through to another type of one that gets outside of the transaction systems. And this is where you start getting into this world of organized crime and cyber warriors and threats that is happening at this large-scale level. But yet, what we're unprepared to deal with is even within our educational environment, we talk about the need of, hey, we probably need 30,000 cyber warriors, is one of the numbers I've heard, within the next 5 years. And people's estimates are maybe there's 1,000. Well, how many even have this perception of how dramatic this world is, and how would you start to comprehend those? Because when we think about what we're dealing with, we're often training people into very classic principles. You know, it's kind of the fighting yesterday's war point of view. You know, it's like, well, we all need to understand antivirus. We all need to understand how to get that firewall. We all need to understand these other pieces. That is the noise. There's going to be millions of events filling up big screens and data centers all over the place. Let them fill that up. But in many of those, they're not going to help you. You know, we all saw the advanced persistent threats that the Googles and the rest were having their issues. You know, I know some of those security guys. They're some of the best in the world. I think they've probably bought some of the best technology you can ever have. These types of issues can still take companies off guard. And we can't ever imagine or ever even comprehend that we can get ahead of that. But the other piece is we've got to really go and start to think about, well, how is this going to change over time? You know, my first hope is that in, you know, the next few years that we at least comprehend this so that when you go and talk to people, everybody will at least have a sense of understanding how cyberspace is different from the internet. Because then they'll start to realize we need things like rules. You know, there's no rules of what's even legal. We all watched over the last year what happens to ships off of Somalia and other types of things, and what are the laws out in the middle of the oceans. You think that that is chaotic? Try and come up with who rules the law of something occurring out in cyberspace. Is it where the server is, where the consumer is, where the pipes are, you know, where the router is that they hijack to reroute the traffic? I'm like, I couldn't tell you. You know, all I can say is somebody needs to figure that out. But I think that's going to be a huge thing, is the policy. How do you even agree? You know, what is the international organization that would even go and decide that? You know, I don't know. But at some point, we're going to have to go and create a rule of law of what's valid to occur without in there. And these are big social, political types of things that's going to take us a while. Now, if over the next 10 years we can at least get a sense of understanding this and having some sort of rule, hopefully then we can start to figure out how do we manage this? How do we actually take control of this and not be constantly in an escalating cost of how much does it take me just to connect and deal with and protect myself from the issues, but really start to take advantage. Because if we can, I think that over the next 10, 15 years, we can see even another level of dramatic benefit and value out of how we do this. I think we're already seeing changes in our society. You know, some would say things like newspapers going away and the physical print form is bad, but there is all kinds of new ways of media and exploration and people being able to be published and that are getting their message out that isn't just who got to go and write those stories and what editor said it was okay on that front page. And so we're seeing things to where we're advancing how we're communicating, how we're doing things to where in a few decades, you know, we'll grow up. I went to Beloit College, and every year they go and have this thing of what did the freshmen coming into the college and that all know about when they grew up. And, you know, and that's where you read and you go, gee, they've always had a CD-ROM, those types of things. Well, I go, you know, I think this is going to be one of those things that as we continue to look more and more, you know, the internet was always there. Everything I always did was always connected. I never saw a physical dollar. You know, it was always inside my cell phone that I zapped my money. You know, these are the types of pieces that I think are going to dramatically change, you know, everything that we see over time. And so that's really where, you know, as you think about that, I think we really need to go and think about what are these then tasks. You know, we need to figure out how do we deal with kind of this cyber crime. You know, it's getting worse. You know, and the hardest problem is we as a society rarely see it. We can see ramifications. You know, somebody can lose their identity and lose their home and other types of things, and it's a CNN story, but it's hard because it's not this physical thing. You know, it's really easy when somebody drives a truck through the door at a bank and everybody gets to see it on the news and it's real and it's like, oh my gosh, if you were standing in there. But, you know, when you have this thing that is so virtual that you can't see, it's like, yeah, I know it's there, but I feel like if I turn off the TV and if I, you know, stop reading kind of the homepage on my morning blog site, you know, I don't have to kind of deal with it. But these things are going to pervade everything. You know, I don't know, did somebody while I'm sitting here, you know, log into my phone and proxy calls to overseas somewhere and run up a $1,000 bill? It can happen. Do I know it occurred? These types of things can affect things that you don't even understand. And I think this is where we got to realize we need to get organized to start to go after some of these big threats. I think we need to, as I mentioned, really define these rules of cyberspace. You know, what is appropriate? You know, is it appropriate if there's a threat out there and somebody that is causing major havoc to the ability of you to do business, to be able to stop them? You know, well, gee, what if stopping them involves touching their systems? Well, gee, no, you can't do that. You know, these are the hard things that we get into of how do you achieve that? You know, so, well, if there is no police, if there is no law, what do I do? Just continue to be damaged? You know, and these are kind of the struggles that we all get into because there is no real answer to each of these. And so I think this is where, you know, how do we really change this dialogue? You know, and part of it is that we need to make sure that this is a topic that is not just, here's this technical thing that sits off to the side, but just as we talk about, you know, constantly in all of our interactions of what's happening in business, what's happening within sports, what's happening within kind of the social environment, we need to make sure that this is always a constant piece because this is as systemic as kind of our oceans are to our way of life. We can't live without it. You can't live without this anymore. We've changed our society. You can't go back. We need to make sure, though, that every one of us gains and grows in the understanding of this. And it's not just a bunch of technical people off doing their piece, but this has permeated everything because it's everything that we're doing is under there. I think the other piece is that as you look at this, you know, we got to also get out of kind of the classic sensibilities of kind of IT type security. How many alerts did you have? How many things? There is so much noise, you can't keep up with that. We need to start thinking about, we use this technology to achieve benefits. What are those benefits? How can I go look at, hey, am I able to transact my business? Because you will never get to 100% eradication. You need to go and still do those best practices, but you'll never get to that 100%. And we need to make sure, though, that our responses to threats do not inhibit our ability to actually innovate and work and strive as a business. You know, if you look at these things, you know, part of what that gets into is also, you know, how do we actually, you know, kind of automate kind of what was classic? And so this is where if I look at, if you think of we're in the internet age to the cyber age as far as things are. You know, we look at our kids and we're amazed how they can pick up all this new technology. Well, the most interesting thing is they didn't pick up all the stuff that we have as baggage from the past. You know, they're not bound by all the things and the ways we grew up with it and the rest. They just know what is and what is new. And so it's inspiring to see my kids figure out stuff, and my wife goes, oh my gosh, how'd they do that? I go, well, you're thinking about the computers we used to have. They've only played with these. And so it's one of these where we've simplified the old. Well, we need to do that to the internet. The internet has taken on this set of priorities and things to where our spending, our priorities, our focus of what we're doing, we have these huge escalating budgets of all of what we do just to deal with the IT. We need to start figuring out how does that world automate itself, take care of it. We can never have people making all those types of decisions. How do you clear out that noise? How do you get that there? So that then our talent and our focus can be upon what are those things that are going to really systemically affect kind of our businesses and get it back into kind of that business dialogue. And one of the things that I look at as one of the biggest indicators is I talked about we need far more talent who starts to really get this world, understands it. But if you look at it, the predominant amount of our workforce is classically trained. If we think of just even IT security, we teach people about here's a router, here's a firewall, here's this device. Did you get a certification for that? Do you know how to build that type of network that way? And if you build it all that way, that's, you know, then you're going to be safe. Our adversaries go, read all the best practices, say, great, what if I built a network out of every single one of those pieces? What still works and gets through? And so even if you did your job perfectly, they go and say, well, heck, that'd be too hard to come through the front door. Let me figure out how to get into a PDF and get into somebody's USB stick and figure out if I can find everybody's home email address and other types of things and send it there because their home machines might not be as affected. And they'll think it's from a business colleague because it looks like it is, and they don't go and figure out how to even tell whether it was a forged email address on their Gmail. I'm going, that'll be a lot easier way, you know? And so I'll just walk in the back door and they'll stick it in on Monday morning. And so you've done all these classical types of things on the front, and then it walks right in. And this is where, you know, we watch Stuxnet virus going, somebody building it to go on a USB stick to go into some nuclear power plant that supposedly got, you know, the best approach. These types of things are real. These are not just, hey, could they happen? You know, PDF, advanced persistent threats, are kind of one of the biggest, latest things. Probably one of the first things that I would classify as kind of really a cyber threat as opposed to kind of a legacy one. But we need to think about this. Well, what's interesting is if you think about that educational approach, hardly anybody knows, well, how would you break into your system? We all train them, here's how you defend it. But how would you break in? Because the thing we know about security is that somebody who's looking from the outside in will go against the weakest part. You know, you can put big giant bolts on your front door and you put a screen door on the back side of the house because you want that big sliding glass view. You know, they're not going to go in and try and knock through your big giant deadbolts on the front of the door. You know, well, the same exact thing. If we train everybody classically, here's how it is. It's going to be a crunchy, you know, on the outside and hard and squishy in the middle of my network. You know, they're not going to go and try and attack it through the front end of your website. You know, if you go host it up on Amazon, nobody's going to go try and take that down. And that's whereas, you know, I deal with telcos. You know, in Brazil last year, we had 300,000 people log into their bank in the morning only to find that they went to a fake site. And none of their machines were compromised, and none of the bank systems were compromised, but yet people moved a heck of a lot of money because we said, well, guess what? The ISP's DNS server, let me just go after that and point that bank address to a different IP address that looks just like it, and they'll all happily type in their password and give it to me. You know, well, guess what? This is a different type of world. They don't go and say, I'm going to attack that bank on the front door. And so I think this is where we need to make sure that even as we think and we educate, that we get people to think about this, not from how we've been classically trained, but from the outside. And hopefully, that's my hope of even with UMBC and others, is that it's going to be the young kids who are not bound by all the ill lessons learned that the rest of us have done to secure the internet over the last 20 years that will be able to actually comprehend how do you go take advantage and kind of control this world. And so thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions, but hopefully that gives you a bit of my view on security. Making the perception? I think it does. So the question, if all of you didn't hear it, is, you know, do you perceive this global view as kind of there's an opportunity of kind of a business model within there? You know, I think it does. You know, I think in one way that's part of what we've been trying to do in kind of our approach to cyber is, you know, getting our customers out of racking and stacking boxes and thinking about you can't predict the threat tomorrow. You know, you simply need an infrastructure to go and that can adapt it. I think that there's going to be many companies, though, that can make a business out of helping organizations even comprehend this. You know, simply looking at the simple silos of indicators of, you know, insider threat. You know, we build a bunch of things buying technology, and it's actually probably helping our business leaders across the organization understand, you know, why is it that people get dismayed, and how do we make a better workplace, you know, to kind of do that. It'd probably be a heck of a lot cheaper than all the electronic systems. And so I think there's probably many businesses in this. But what I look at is that, if anything, there's probably extreme amount of damage that will happen to all businesses if we don't kind of comprehend this. Now, I'm not somebody to kind of go and be the one of kind of a business transformation kind of guy. You know, I'm much more of a techie, as you heard, of, you know, kind of building the nuts and the bolts. But, you know, a lot of what I've talked about are the lessons I've learned from many of our kind of brilliant customers of kind of how they perceive it. But I do think there is a world of opportunity, and it's not going to look at all like the internet. And that's where my hope for, you know, as over the next, you know, 10, 15 years, is that this will be an environment that none of us will recognize. Because this is not just Web 2.0, Web 3.0, Web 4.0, some long trajectory. This is transformational of changing from the internet as a physical electronic thing to an entirely different environment. Any merit to hiding your money on your mattress? Well, you know, if I look at the deflation, I don't know that, you know, that's a very good thing, but it's not a whole lot different than my bank account's 0.25%. So, you know, maybe floating the dollar. You know, I think, you know, there's a couple of pieces. Is one, yeah, we can all go hide our money under, you know, the mattress type thing, but over time, we still need to build the wealth and invest in things and do the rest. And I think kind of the putting our head under the mattress type point of view is not going to go and achieve kind of those end benefits. And I think this is the piece where, out of the security side of anything, is why I even say to get the focus off, is that I watch business executives, listen to the technology executives talking about, there was 400,000 attempts against our enterprise last month. There was, you know, this many alerts. You'll sit there and say, oh my gosh, why am I even touching it? I think part of it is there's a lot of noise. You know, you know, if I went and took every statistic of small little random things and put it in the newspaper, you'd think the whole world was falling apart. But yet what it is like, okay, let's take the context out of it. Let's understand it. You know, there's lots of automated computers doing all kinds of things, but how many were really going after our business? How many of those do I really need to understand? There's probably only a few. And if we can get ourselves back to that, it actually becomes a much more manageable problem. And it's the same type of way. You know, I have all my stuff in electronic systems out there and the rest, but it's, you know what, it's best practices. And at some point, I'm going to worry about that is the insurance and the FDIC and others going to be there. I'm not going to expect that, okay, our whole global economy is going to go down. If it does, all right, we're all going down, and I don't think I can protect that, because then my dollar's probably not going to be worth anything underneath kind of that mattress. But I think it's getting yourself back to what really matters, what's that value, you know, that then will become the noise, and let's do it. Yep. So in that system, you know, the banks then go and ended up going through trying to figure out which accounts had that types of things, of those moves to then get it back. You know, the government has to go and then refund those types of pieces. You know, that then gets the economy, because a lot of that the government didn't get back. You know, the crime didn't go in. You know, these types of systems on a global basis also work themselves out. You know, all of us here in the U.S., most of us didn't even hear about, you know, that particular piece, because it becomes in the noise on that global landscape. And so, yes, in a microcosm, there's people who deal with that, but in that broader piece, it evens it, and we're still dealing. Yeah, well, so what you defined as something to where you have, you know, large companies defining things that are not best practices. You have confusion out there, you know, in the market, and, you know, you've defined why it's also a multi-billion-dollar kind of security industry that we have, you know, of everything from educating to selling products that people need, some cases they don't need. We're going to have to get over that. And I think that is going to still be there. You know, I sell equipment into a lot of those places to go and be able to achieve that. But this is where getting the commentary and getting that understanding, you know, if you have all those consumers, take just your healthcare example. If you get all those consumers saying, no, I'm not going to change the security settings on my browser, and demanding kind of those companies to kind of change things, you'll get advancements into kind of that role. But at the same time, you know, there's also other types of technology how to do it. So for me at home, when I'm dealing with any of my medical, any of my banking and the rest, I have virtual machines that I start up, that I do my web browser session in, that is all of how I do. And I destroy it at the end, and I start with a fresh one at the next. And so it sets a cookie into that one VM for that one link. It disappears at the end of that. There is no persistence that's cutting across. And so there's places to where even a perfectly, you know, kind of sensible thing that makes it easy but seems to be problematic of have them have cookies, how do they go do that? The likelihood of somebody sitting in the middle of my one SSL session is pretty darn low. I'm happy to go deal with that. I don't even have to worry about if all I'm going to his website, do I even have the right level of antivirus? Do I have all the rest of those pieces for that? You know, these are some of the things that occur. And so as we go over time, I think our world's going to change, but it's not going to be just always the way that we kind of saw that. You know, but it is hard because, like, the number one, I think, threat to a lot of consumers last year was these fake antivirus type things popping up and people buying fictitious stuff. Yeah, so CloudShield, for, you know, I don't expect many of you know it. There's only about 130 of us out west before we became part of SAIC this last year. We had a very simple view of how to do security. And that was taking the premise that I cannot predict what you're going to need to do in a network. And so from the networks, most of us see kind of this racking and stacking of boxes. You know, I grew up in the mainframe age. You know, I programmed on big MVS, you know, IBM servers and VMS, you know, VAX machines, the rest of these, to where you went and you bought a computer from a vendor that did one particular purpose. And then we watched, and I grew up as then the PCs came into the home, and now it's whether it's in a cloud, software differentiates what we do in computing. You know, we all have kind of the same type of underlying, but the hardware that I have to go buy and deploy should not change it. Well, if you go look in a network, we go and we say, well, you need to have firewalls and routers and switches and intrusion protection, antivirus and email things and the rest. And these are all discrete pieces. And different vendors will often build them with different boxes and the rest. Our view was, if I can't predict what I need tomorrow, I don't even know if I need a router. I have networks we've built that have no routers in them. You know, but yet, as I go look at that, what if what changed was really what you wanted to do in that type of connectivity? And so that's where CloudShield builds systems that go into networks. They're designed to be secure from the ground up. That means that part of it is you don't even make yourself visible. You can't see it. You can't, you know, measure it from timing and other types of pieces. It's securely provisioned like our old phone networks from a separate network, not the internet. It's like our routers are provisioned from the network on which we're on, and that's where we get these threats, is these models of where you can actually log into your firewall on your same enterprise network, as opposed to completely separate types of ones, how you do that. And so that's where we build systems that go out there, and then as brilliant people understand a problem and come up with how you're going to go defend it, they download software virtually into those types of systems. And so that's where we go. We protect tier 1 telcos, and so we sit on transatlantic type crossings, you know, to go do things like defense against hundreds of thousands of bots and denial of service. To the banking thing I talk, we do DNS protection so that make sure that phone book does not go down and ensure that's protected. To we do simple things like in Korea, you know, if you light up your cell phone on KTF's network, you know, the billing of what you went and accessed, they'll charge you more for a web page than an email. You know, and those are the types of things, but those are just software. And that's where it's really a whole new breed of systems that is our goal to kind of put into this network.
Now, I'm curious, you're talking about like the new threats that we're seeing are, you know, people kind of trying to go into the back doors and, you know, find the weak spots rather than, you know, just coming up to the front like what was done in the previous generation. Now, that sounds very similar to a few years ago when, you know, the terrorist threat started to become a real thing. We were talking about, you know, rather than the traditional battle cap fighting a whole new war, which got me thinking, are there any lessons learned that you can really see outside of the technology industry with the coming cyber threats that you can kind of look at as pretty experience, or is this truly a unique thing that we've never really seen before?
Yeah, so I think, can you learn from these different areas? I think we can learn in both directions. You know, how we've gone in kind of in cyberspace, the lessons we learned in moving to maneuver warfare and other things and asymmetric threats are the things that help us understand how to get in there, because you're still dealing with people on either side and kind of their different roles and kind of approaches. I think the same way as we learn how to do systems that automatically learn and adapt and get these pieces, we can apply them to other models. And so I do think this is something that's going to pervade kind of all of these environments. So thank you.
Thank you. Don't forget.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Actually, it's very good, but I also want you to do some advertising for us.
Awesome.
As you return, or maybe return again, I want you to carry something from UMBC. So thank you very much for this great talk this morning. We will meet again February 23rd. Actually, as we begin the 2011 part of our Visionaries in IT series. And our speaker then will be Charlie Groom, who's Vice President of Cyber Solutions for Lockheed Martin. So I hope you'll put that on your agenda and join us then. Looking at our next meeting will be in February. I want to first of all thank all of you for attending. Hope you'll come again. We got the holiday season coming up. I hope all of you have wonderful holiday seasons. And the time in between those seasons, I hope, are very productive for you for business. So thanks again for coming out this morning. Bye-bye.